Hi all, welcome to the final CAE CAT seminar of this semester. Our speaker is Dr. Shouraseni Sen Roy, who will talk about climate change impacts and responses in the Indian Sundarban Delta. Dr. Shouraseni Sen Roy received her BA, MA, and MPhil from the University of Delhi and her PhD from Arizona State University. She's currently Professor of Geography and Sustainable Development at the University of Miami. Her research over the last 2 decades has concentrated on expanding understanding of long-term trends in climatic processes and impacts of climate change. Her research methodology incorporates spatial analysis using advanced geostatistical techniques to analyze climatic variable trends. Thank you very much, Professor Sen Roy, and it's all yours. You're muted, sorry.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Pranay, for the introduction and for the invitation to share my research with you all. This research I'm going to present today is, firstly, this is the first time I'm presenting this research, which I started about a year back. So it's a relatively new research project that I've started and have already discover so many complex issues that's going on in this part of the world. So as the title says, it's living on the edge. It's literally living on the edge. It's the Indian Sundarban Delta. And it's looking at the local level long-term impacts of climate change in these communities. And so this image you see here, it's a boat, and as you can see, these boats are used to travel between the different islands. And these boats are usually, this is a relatively emptier boat, but these boats are used to go between these islands, and these boats consist of all forms of living beings and non-living beings, which includes cows and bikes and motorcycles, and also, kids going to school and so on. So let me first introduce you to my study area, which is the Indian Sundarban Delta, which is located on the Sundarbans are located on the border of India and Bangladesh. It's a delta. It's a region consisting of more than 1,000 islands, among which majority of it is in Bangladesh. My study area, the region I will be talking about, is the Indian part of the Sundarbans. As you can see in this map, it consists of multiple small islands consisting of intertidal waves. This delta has been formed by 2 major rivers, the river Ganges and the river Brahmaputra, and all its distributaries. It is one of the fastest growing delta in the world, but it is also in the front lines of climate change because of the vulnerability to sea level rise, climate extremes. These islands are also known for very rich biodiversity, including some 69 types of mangrove species, and also animal species like the olive ridley turtles. This is also the region where the Royal Bengal tiger comes from. So most of you, if you've been to a zoo, the tiger you see there is always an exhibit of the Royal Bengal tiger, which is endemic to this region. And also it is a very densely populated part of the world. So the islands, so most of the islands, as you can see here, these are protected natural forests, natural preserves. And then the islands which you see with the non-green marks, those are the islands which are inhabited by local residents. These islands are located close to the mainland of the Indian subcontinent, including Bangladesh and India. And the biggest city for the Indian part of the Sundarban Delta is the Kolkata metropolitan area, which is, some of you may know, it's located on the banks of the river Hooghly, which is a distributary of the river Ganges. So that's the major city on which most of the people living here depend on. So in this study, in this talk, I'm going to be focusing on looking at the 2 parts, which is the physical and the human aspects of climate change. So I'm going to use some variety of resources and results to highlight the impacts of climate change already ongoing and the vulnerability of it. And I would like to start with this statement, which in my last trip in May of 2022, when I visited, or June 2022, when I visited the islands, one of the residents made about these islands. And he mentioned about these islands being like it's like a floating plate. So it's a floating plate where they are building embankments constantly to protect these islands from erosion. And to build these embankments, they are taking, I'm going to stop this here, they're taking out soil from inside the islands. So it's almost like these islands are like thin plates floating on the water. And it's a losing battle against the impacts of climate change and sea level rise, because the islands are becoming thinner and thinner, and these embankments are not strong enough to withstand the impacts of storm surge, like from cyclones, or as we call it here as hurricanes, but also just a high tide can also destroy these embankments. So this is a false color image you see here, and this animation takes us through the different years from the 70s to current period. And the red colors here show the vegetation, and this is the inhabited parts of the islands. So these are the islands which are inhabited, and these are the protected areas. It's a very popular tourist area, so a lot of small hotels have shown up on the edges of these islands, which are next to the protected areas. So a lot of tourists come here to sight a tiger, and most of the times they don't see the tiger, but they do come for visits here. So just to highlight the changes, this is one of the one snapshot of it. So you can see on the top the location of some of these islands and the changes in the shape. So the islands not only have some islands disappeared, but also some of the islands, the shapes have changed. Some of these islands have been undergoing constant erosion. So this is the difference between 1980 and 2020, and later on I'll show you over time on short time scales. The biggest island here is the Sagar Island, which is the island here and kind of the southernmost part of the edge of the island system. And this island, when I visited in June 2022, there's a very famous temple here. And this has, like, you might have heard, some of the big religious festivals that happen in India, brings a lot of people, like the Kumbh Mela. They have a Sagar Mela here. It's a fair, religious fair. It happens every year, brings a lot of tourists here. And there's a temple located here, which has been moved inland several times over the time span because of erosion that goes on here. So the ocean is constantly moving in, forcing the temple to move inwards more and more. As you can see here also then out here, that some of the islands have also increased in size. So for instance, out here, this island actually has increased in size. But then there are islands, especially the two small islands of Lohachara and Ghoramara. Lohachara is no longer there. This island has disappeared completely. And Ghoramara is, the government has been evacuating residents from this island to the big island. Oh, this is what happens. To the big island of Sagar. So because this is no longer safe for residents to live here. Other islands, as you can see here, and I'll show you more later, as you can see, there's a lot of constant erosion going on. The sizes have changed. There have been some studies that have shown that these smaller islands are more vulnerable to sea level rise and erosion. There's also studies showing those islands which are located in the interior of the Sundarbans being less vulnerable versus those which are more exposed, which makes sense. And we'll go through that. Here are some of the images from the effects of the receding coastline. So this particular picture you see is a church, formerly a church, no longer functions as a church. And as you can see, it's one leg is already out. It's just barely hanging on to the ground. You can see the exposed roots. So this island used to go much farther out and it's no longer there. This church has been abandoned. This is another house. This is a residential, multi-level residential house. Obviously, this house was not on the coast. This was much interior, but the coastline has been receding. So again, this building has been abandoned. And over time, it's just a matter of time that this building may not be there in the next several years. One thing I also wanted to point out was that the islands are constantly trying to protect themselves from, inundation, flooding, storm surge, sea level rise. So what they do is they build these mud embankments. So what we have here is seawalls, concrete seawalls, but they just build mud embankments. Some islands have concrete brick embankments, and some have just these mud embankments. And if you look at this image more carefully, you will see that this is actually the roof of a house. So the house is below the embankment. So the actual level of the island is much lower. So they build these embankments, which can be, 10-foot high embankments, or sometimes 5 or 6 foot high embankments. And the first hurricane that comes through here will just go through these embankments will just collapse. They don't survive. And so then what they do, the local residents do, is take out soil from the interior of the islands and then again start building up these embankments. Here is a brick, as I was mentioning, there are some permanent embankments. These are the embankments which are built with concrete and bricks to make them more permanent. This embankment was destroyed by the last cyclone, which went through, Cyclone Yas. And so the last two cyclones was one in 2021 was Amphan, which actually went over the island and caused a lot of destruction. And then Cyclone Yas, which happened in, Amphan happened in 2020, Yas happened in 2021. And Yas didn't even go over the islands, but it caused a lot of destruction. So this is one of those where the islands, these embankments can't withstand those kind of, today Landolf was talking about the storm surge and winds. So this is one of those impacts you can see. In some places, the embankments are built, as you can see, these are mud embankments. Here, this is where the breach has taken place. And you can see again the roof, so the houses are much lower. So once the water goes over these embankments, the houses completely get flooded. And we are also out here, I'll show some other images, which actually show that there are rice fields, agricultural land, which all gets salt water inundated and not suitable for agriculture. These are some of the temporary measures to protect the islands, protect the embankments. So once local residents, depending on the islands, they are very active. The moment the embankment gets breached, they immediately try to fix them by putting in, as many rocks and boulders, and also these are like straw walls they try to put in, the kind of woven straw mats they try to put in to protect the islands. This is the NDVI, Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. And so this is just showing the change in vegetation. So I didn't have images, were not available for all the time periods. So let me just go to these. So I've just made some, and I will share my link with you guys so you can see the changes over time. So this is 1972 to 77 on the left. This is 1972 to 77. And on the right is 87 to 92. And so you can see the changes that happened. So it's not always that the islands have been losing, shrinking in size or, losing coastline. In this particular period, you may see that there are actually more islands here in this region. There are actually more islands from before. And even out here, this particular island has also grown in size in the 87 to 92. And we can keep going. So you can see here, there's changes islands and between Sagar and the other islands here in this section has changed. So let me go down to my, this section shows it better. Let me see if I can, yeah. So this actually shows, I've put all those images together just to show the increase in size of the islands and decrease in size of the islands. So just to orient you, the blue squares show the decrease in size of the islands or just complete disappearance, and the reds show increase. So as I was mentioning that over time, these islands have, depending on the amount of water flowing through these river channels, tidal channels, hurricanes and other erosional activities, they have either increased or decreased in size. And so here is an example out here, as you can see, the section here, over time, it's not less amount of landmass we can see here, but it has increased by 2017 to 2022. But more focus or more noticeable is this area here. These are the two islands I was mentioning before. This is Koramara, this is Lohachara. So if you look out here, those islands, the Lohachara is no longer there, and Koramara has become uninhabited. There are other islands. For instance, you can see out here, this particular island, which is Jambu Deep, was a lot bigger before. It's become very small. Tips of these islands have become smaller compared to from the 70s to now. And also, of course, Sagar, there has been many studies that have been done to look at this particular island, how the shape of this island has changed over time with receding coastline. So this one shows the vegetation index. This is the amount of vegetation. So greener the color, the more the amount of vegetation. So we can also see over time, the vegetation has also, reduced quite a bit. The most of the images are from the winter time when it's relatively more clear skies. So let me show you some of the impacts of these on the natural vegetation. So this was after Cyclone Yas. This is a rice field. So most of the residents here, the main occupation of the local communities here is farming, mostly growing rice and vegetables, and betel leaf. Betel leaf is another major cash crop here. So this was after the Cyclone Yas in July 2021. And these are the rice fields completely inundated with salt water. And so once these fields are inundated with salt water, they try to pump out the water. So they actually, in some places, they have to actually manually break the embankments to pump out the water and then rebuild it. But what is more important is that this land becomes unusable for agriculture. I went a year later in June 2022, the land was still not suitable for agriculture. So once this inundation happens, this land can be unusable for agriculture for 2 or 3 years, which is a major loss for these local communities. It has a major impact on their livelihoods. These are some of the other images from those rice fields inundated with salt water. And then this is this is a quote from one of the residents, one of the guides actually, who was taking us around the islands. And it was interesting the way he described it. He said, it's a constant struggle for all living organisms, including trees, animals, and humans, to survive in this harsh ecosystem. He described it as like everybody's struggling, everybody's trying to make a living in these islands. And here you can see these are the mangrove trees, which are underwater, barely trying to survive, trying to hold on to some amount of soil. But also with increasing human pressure, for the local residents, there's a lot of deforestation that goes on. They are also going into these, for a long time, a lot of the residents would go into these forests to collect honey. So some of the best quality honey in India comes from here. So they were called the honey collectors. And they would go into these forests to collect honey and sometimes timber. Now timber is banned. Nobody can collect timber, at least legally they cannot collect timber. But and then also this area, these islands also have a lot of, wildlife, which one of the major ones being the crocodiles and the tigers, which can be dangerous for these local residents going into these islands, these forests. And here are some of the other images of the trees submerged in rising water levels. So those are the physical aspects of, that's what's going on over time in these islands. So how does it impact the local residents? So one of the first ones is so when I talk to the local residents, one of the questions that keeps coming up is, why are you still living here? So, like it's a losing battle. Why not just leave when it's time and you still have time? And the constant answer I get from them is that it's their home. This is their home. This is where they live. This is where their ancestors have lived for so many years, and they're not going to leave this place. These three pictures are from they're called what we can call climate refugees. This is a mother and daughter. They are from the island of Lohachara, which is the island doesn't exist anymore. So when I talked to them, they talked about how she talked about how she got married in Lohachara when she was in her teens. And then her parents lived there, her husband's family lived there, they were from the same island. And so now, because the island was getting, submerged, too much flooding, they were forced to move out. The government actually evacuated them to the closest big island, which is the Sagar Island. They don't have as much facilities. As you can see, they have, plastic tarp with some bamboo poles. That's their house. This is her daughter. She goes to a local school, but they live in a part of the island of the Sagar Island. They live in a part of the island which is on the edge of the island. So they are again very exposed to rising sea levels. So they have moved from one island which was already very vulnerable. So from so almost like frying pan to the fire. So they know that they are also very vulnerable here, but this is where all the, the sort of climate refugees or the islands which have been inundated have been moved to. This is an entire community they call as a refugee colony. This lady, I was talking to her, right here, she's actually catching fish. She's catching fish by hand. So she's just going down in the water. This is a local pond near her house. And she's catching fish by hand. And this small pot, as you can see here, we call this handi in India. And she's catching the fish and putting them into this vessel to cook lunch. So she and her son, they are just going down into the water and catching fish. And as I was talking to them, I was asking them about their experiences, and they said that they constantly face flooding from just from high tides. Every time there's a high tide, if it's a slightly higher high tide, like the new moon time, the water will just flow over and inundate their rice fields. So in front of her house is a small plot of land where she can grow rice. But she said that the cyclone Yas, with all the salt water, destroyed the soil, and she didn't plant any rice for this year, and she doesn't see herself planting next year also, given the unusability of the soil. This is so what happens is that, so other than being forced evacuation, a lot of times also what is happening is that many of the younger residents, they are leaving the islands in search of other jobs, because once the land gets inundated with salt water, they can't grow crops, so they have to look for some other job opportunities. So this is a as they call a migrant couple. They left the islands to go to other parts of India. So many of them actually, they're not that skilled because they've been farmers most of their lives, farmers or fishermen. So they go to other parts of India, mainland India. So they usually will first go to Kolkata, which is the closest big city. But there's not that much, the economy in Kolkata is quite depressed. So they go to southern India, where there's a lot more jobs, and they work in the construction sector. So he went for construction job, and he learned quite a bit about, building houses, working in the construction sector. And she went with him, and she got a job in a textile factory. and she would work long hours. And Pranay, don't kill me, but this is in your part of the country, in southern India, in Andhra Pradesh. And they went, and so they were talking about, they came back when COVID hit and the lockdown. There were very severe lockdowns in India, and they came back, and they couldn't live there, even though the living conditions are very hard there. As you can imagine, they don't make that much money, but it was still enough money to send back home to rebuild their houses, make it better, and so on. And they also learned some skills. So when I talked to them about, their experiences, they talked about how they missed the open air, being near the water. They didn't like the city life, and also they had a lot of, they didn't like the food there, because the food habits are very different from one part of the country to the other. But this is a rising trend there, that most of the local young residents are leaving the islands and moving to bigger cities and other parts of the country in search of jobs. So the ones who are left behind are usually the elderly population, and sometimes they leave behind their kids. But most of the times, once the kids reach teenage years, even like for them, their son actually, who is in his teens, he also went there to work and make money to send back. And so here is the other aspect, which is like what happens with these climate refugees, or the type of house. So most of the time, so this is an example. Let's see if I can, yeah. So this is a house. So this house is a house, as you can see, it's just made of mud and straw roof, and there's a plastic tarp to protect from rain. You can only imagine how safe this house is, or how resilient this house is. It's located on an embankment. This is a mud embankment, and you can see the waterways there. It's right on the coast. There's still flood waters here. This is all salt water. So this person actually lived right here. This was all his agricultural land. And once Cyclone Yas came by, his house was completely destroyed. He rebuilt his house. And so that's a very common phenomena, that they rebuild their houses on the raised part of the embankments. So when the raised parts, that's why they rebuild their houses. This is a little bit better house, but as you can see, still the mud walls. So the government is actually giving money to them, to the local residents, to convert their houses to brick houses, so that they can be more resilient to storm surges and hurricanes. But there are a lot of restrictions. So when I talked to some of the residents, they mentioned about that, depending on your political affiliation, which party you voted for. If you didn't vote for the ruling party, you don't get the money. And also you get some money up front, and you have to build 3/4 of the house, and then get the rest of the money to build the rest of the house. So a lot of the houses I saw there were half built, like maybe they had one wall which was concrete and the other one was not, because they didn't receive the entire money. And then also you could identify the houses which did not vote for the ruling party, such as this one, which had a mud wall and roof. But what happens is that once there is go back to this image, once their houses get destroyed, most of them, what they do is they build their houses on these raised embankments. That's where they feel the safest, because they can't anymore build, can't anymore live on their property, so they just build it on top of these embankments. Another aspect, so if you ever do any search on these Sundarbans, there is a lot of talk about human-wildlife conflicts. So as I mentioned, that there are a lot of different types of wildlife there, and not all the wildlife are friendly towards human beings. So there's a lot of human-wildlife conflicts that goes on here. And most of the conflicts are with the tigers locally, which are local to here. And there has been, as you can see out here, there have been about 445. This is one of the statistics I found. There have been 445 casualties in West Bengal, where the Delta Sundarban is located, between 1990 and 2009, out of which 40 people are attacked by tigers every year. So what is happening is, as I mentioned in the beginning, is that it's a constant struggle for all the wildlife, trees, animals, human beings, everybody to survive in this ecosystem. And so it's also hard for the tigers to survive here. So what happens is that a lot of times the local, farmers or the fishermen, they will go into, or the what they call the non-timber products, forest products collection. They will go into these protected islands to catch fish because the fish are the best, or go for crab collection to these islands. A lot of times they will go in the night. And the reason they go in the night are for various reasons. One is that at new moon, the crabs, because of the tides, the crab collection is the best. Also, because there are a lot of regulations from the government, they just can't go in. They are actually not supposed to be in these islands. These are protected forests, but because of the increasing pressure, they go into these islands at nighttime. And most of the times, it's the men who go to these islands to collect, these forest products, and they get attacked by tigers, and they don't make it back to their homes. So this is a lady I met there in 2021, July 2021. So what has happened is that these islands now have a growing community of what they call as a tiger widows. So tiger widows, they are these women. There's a whole group of women there in these different islands whose husbands have been taken by the tigers, killed by the tigers. And so what happens is that usually when these men, they go into the forest to, crab collection or fishing or whatever, once the tiger attacks, so they actually wear a face mask, like a mask of a face painted on the back of their head, so that the tiger thinks that the person is looking at them from the back also. So they have face on both sides. So this lady, she lost her husband on January 21, 2020, when she went with her husband to collect crabs. And she described the whole story to me, and read about this here. The local residents here, every corner of these islands, you will see, especially the riverine part of the islands, you will see a lot of temples, which are dedicated to the goddess Bono Bibi. And Bono Bibi is worshipped by all communities, irrespective of their Hindus or Muslims. Those are the two main religions in these islands, and everybody worships that particular goddess. And Bono Bibi is supposed to protect you from tiger attack. And so she described about how when she went with her husband, they took this small boat to collect crabs at night. It was a new moon night, so they were having very good crab collection. And she talked about how she heard a small creak in the forest, and she asked her husband about it, and her husband said there was nothing going on. And then before she knew, the tiger came and attacked her husband. And usually what would happen is if the men go, once the tiger attacks one of them, they just flee. They just leave the person who's attacked. They don't even try to rescue him or bring him. But she was really brave. She fought with the tiger. The tiger got on her boat, and she fought with the tiger, and she kept shouting for prayers to the goddess and Bono Bibi. And once the tiger, I think she scared the tiger, and the tiger fled. And then she found her husband under the boat, and took him on the boat, and she brought him back to the village for the last rites. Obviously, he didn't survive the attack. But this is a very common story among the women in the islands, where these tiger widows who are very young in age, they get married in their teens, so they don't have enough education or any other skills. And once they lose their husbands, their main breadwinner of the family, they don't have much of sources of livelihood. So they get into utter poverty. Most of them have little kids with them. And that's a major issue. There have been a lot of NGOs who are working with this community of tiger widows to give them sources of livelihood. And one of the things she said was that she was really disappointed. She blamed the goddess Bonobiri for not protecting her husband despite her repeated prayers. That's what was her main complaint about them. The other aspect is the fisherman. So this was this was a fisherman. We met him, and this is in Sagar Island. You can see the sea there. There was a huge concrete embankment here, which was completely destroyed. I have not included the picture here. This is the second embankment. So there were two embankments. He's standing on one of them. This is one concrete embankment, but there was one farther down there. And when I saw it, I couldn't believe it. It looked like somebody took the seawall, put it in a blender, and ran the blender. So it was actually small pieces, huge, big pieces lying around. That's all you could see of that embankment. And this guy described when Cyclone Yas came and how he basically, when the warnings were issued, so now the Indian Meteorological Department does a very good job of issuing cyclone warnings. So that's they have developed much better. And he mentioned about how he made his family leave the house, go into the interior of the island to their friends and family. And he stayed here, and he talked about how, and kind of remind me of what Landolf was mentioning about storm surge, this wall of seawater coming toward you. And he described about he was standing, because when the water started rising, all the residents who are left behind, they get up on these embankments because that's the highest part of the island at that point. And he talked about how the wall of water just came and, just washed him from these islands to way interior of the island with the result of this storm surge. A lot of the local residents also have, their own ponds here. So this is a very common feature that they do their own fishing. So it's for subsistence. Most of the houses have small pond attached to them, and their livestock. So livestock pond, that's very common feature here. And they would catch fish for their lunch. So this was the one time my hosts, this is actually a huge fish, very, very popular fish in in that part of the country, Katla. And these are the fish they caught that day from that pond here. This is another farmer we were talking about, how he actually pointed out farther down, he pointed at a marine vessel out there in the ocean, showing that that's how far his land went, his farmland went. But nothing of that now exists. He has now very little of it left as what he calls as his property. Other than that, there is also a lot of the residents have now started, what they've started doing is shrimp aquaculture. So they've started making these shrimp ponds. There is both positives and negatives of these shrimp aquaculture, and some of you may know more about it. So what they have been doing is these shrimp ponds are coming up in place of agricultural land, or they're cutting down forests. They're cutting down trees and building these shrimp ponds. And there has been a lot of criticism about this because the natural mangroves have been destroyed to build these because this brings more money, but they are much more vulnerable to sea level rise or the storm surges. The mangroves protects them, but this makes these islands even more vulnerable. So this was one of the shrimp ponds that was they were just constructing it there. These nets, they put the nets around these ponds, and you can see them all around the islands, especially the coastal areas. A lot of the residents here, they actually have, what they would do is they will have a small house here where they will live to catch fish or do farming or whatever they need to do. Fishermen, they will have a house here. A lot of them are actually aware of what's going on. They know that the coastline is eroding. They know that this is not sustainable. They can't be here forever. So what they have been doing is they've been buying up land in the interior of the islands. So my guide actually showed me a lot of the residents, pointed out a lot of the residents he said that they actually have houses inside the island, but they live here for their daily activities. So that's why some of the times you can see these houses which are very temporary in nature. This was a woman who I met, who was a crab farmer or crab collector, and she talked about when I asked her about. I met her right after I met the tiger widow, and I asked her about, like, it is so risky, why she even goes there, and she talked about it's a very lucrative profession. The amount of money she makes is worth the risk to go into those protected areas to collect crabs. So, and when I asked if she would continue after hearing her friend going through that situation, and she said she would continue. And as you can see, that they go at night again because it's illegal, and if they are caught, they have to pay hefty fines. In some parts of Bangladesh, there are actually, I was reading this Guardian article which mentioned about pirates, water pirates. So some of the fishermen, they are kidnapped, and then they find a cell tower or get up on the tree to get a cell, cell phones to work, and then they ask for ransoms to free these fishermen, but they still go into those risky areas because they don't have much options otherwise. Another major profession here is the beetle leaf. So beetle leaf is a what did I call it? It's a type of leaf which is very popular in India. We eat that very commonly. Beetle leaf, this is a beetle leaf plantation. It's a very labor-intensive process, but some of the best beetle leaf, the Bangla pan we call it, comes from this part of the country. And it's a very labor-intensive, as you can see. It's they have to build a straw structure with green cloth around it. And this is actually a roof on top of that. These are beetle leaf is a creeper which grows, and each of these sticks sticking out has a beetle leaf creeper on it. And so there's multiple beetle leaf there. And it's a very labor-intensive process. So inside it looks like this. You can see the beetle leaves here and the sticks sticking out. And it's not only a labor-intensive process, but it has also a lot of rules. So nobody can enter. So I just could not enter this. You have to take a shower. There's a lot of, because it's also used for religious purposes. So there's a lot of rules around it. So even though it's very labor-intensive, but it's still worth the time and energy because it brings in so much money. So let's look at some of the other activity, which is the farmers. So I'm going to talk about this person, this guy. He is in his, I think he said he was in his late 70s or early 80s, his age. This is the embankment he was standing on, and then right here is his land. And he talked about, he said he started crying because he said he has moved 4 times in his life. He's constantly been moving inside because of erosion, because of the, as they call it, the ocean eating up the land. He has had to move 4 times. And the last cyclone really, caused a lot of destruction for him because of the saltwater inundation. So in the back is his son, who was fishing in the local pond, and he talked about he has 3 sons. 2 of his sons don't work, do not have any jobs. They can't do agriculture. They don't go out fishing. But they also, so only 1 son is working. He has got some money, and he invested into that beetle leaf plantation, which you see here. And they're hoping that they would make enough money for the entire family to survive on it. This is a farmer I met on this is again an embankment. So they build these embankments, and out here you can see, and he mentioned about Cyclone Yas, how the water came over the embankment. It's a pretty high embankment, and the water came over that embankment, and talked about how they lost a lot of cattle. So what they do is they take the cattle and bring them up on these embankments, but some of these storm surges or the water levels are so high that it's not even enough, these embankments. And these are some of the farmers who were talking about how they don't have enough support from the government because even though the government gave them some relief, but still they can't do agriculture, and the amount of relief they get from the government is not enough for them to survive without doing any agriculture for 2 to 3 years. Finally, are the children of the Sundarbans. I went during almost right after the bad wave that hit India, the COVID wave that hit India. So I was talking to some of the kids here. So this is an image from one of the relief camps. So Cyclone Yas, after Cyclone Yas, a lot of NGOs started these community kitchens, and so all the community will come together, and they will get donations of rice and lentils, and they have, you know, two meals a day. They get two free meals a day because they can't cook yet in their houses, so they come and eat. So I was talking to some of the kids here who talked about the impact of COVID and the closure of schools, and because it depends on the schools because they get free meals there. They get at least two free meals, and late afternoons almost 3 meals from the schools. So that has affected them. And they also talked about online education, which has been very detrimental because they don't have good cell phone connection here. So that has also affected them quite a bit. So to conclude, I would like to just from my understanding about, you know, the options, the responses to the impact of climate change for the local communities, was that the first step was to replace, repair, or rebuild. So every time there is a natural disaster or, you know, any kind of you know, erosion or anything, the first step they take is to build a new roof. A lot of the residents I talked about, I said, you know, your house gets destroyed every hurricane, every year there's a cyclone, it gets destroyed. Aren't you tired of it? And they said, yeah, it's just a roof blows up and we put a new roof, and it's a tin roof, we put on, and we go on, we rebuild the wall, there are pumps, we design the agricultural land. So they don't consider it such as big. And then a lot of the residents, one thing that was very clear among the community is that they are very aware about you know, what is happening, what is going on. They are very aware about the impacts or what is happening with climate change. So a lot of them are actually buying land inside the island in higher ground. And then some of them who have more money, more resources, they are actually moving to the suburbs of the nearby mega city of Kolkata. So there's actually in Kolkata, there are some, which I plan to visit this coming summer. There are actually areas in Kolkata which are called the Sundarban communities, where all the you know, transplants from Sundarban have bought land and built their houses there. So they try to have so those houses have a typical structure to them that is like they will have quite a bit of garden around their house. So they don't try to cover the entire land with the house, because they need that land. They need some place to grow some kind of crops to make it similar to from where they have come from. So I'll stop here. I just wanted to acknowledge my funders that have helped me, and this work would not have been possible without Professor Ghosh from Jadavpur University, who you know, organized a lot of my trips, and these are the two non-governmental organizations working very actively there. On that note, I'll stop sharing and